Hi, good evening to everybody. Welcome to our Monday night mysticism, our Monday night Shir Chasidus on the Parsha. So tonight's Shir is a fascinating one. We're going to be looking at a number of different perspectives on the Menorah, which is described at the beginning of Parshas Beha'aloisecha. So I think it's appropriate that we first look at the psukim from the beginning of the Parsha. We will also look at the Haftorah, a few of the verses in the Haftorah, which also discuss a vision of Menorah, and then we will launch into different elements of the Menorah and the lessons that they teach us about ourselves, about Torah, and various other matters as well, as taught in the teachings of Chassidus. The content of tonight's shir is primarily based on the writings of the Alter Rebbe, the first of the Chabad Rebbeim, in the work Likutei Torah, as well as the writings of his grandson, the Tzemach Tzedek, Rebbe Menachem Mendel, in his teachings recorded in the work Or HaTorah. So I'll bring up on the screen the psukim of the Menorah, which are important for us to keep in mind as we delve into its deeper meaning. Now, of course, the Menorah was first discussed back in Parshas Tetzaveh. Back in Parshas Tetzaveh is where the command was given to build a Mishkan. And there is a detail of all of the various kelim, all the various items, vessels of service that were used in the Mishkan, and that's where the primary discussion of the design of the menorah is featured. But then we have a repetition of some of the details, as well as an addition of some extra details of the construction of the menorah, which are found in Beha'aloisecha. So we'll start off with the psukim from the parsha. The Torah tells us in Parshas Beha'aloisecha, "Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Leimer." Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, "Daber el Aharon v'amarte elav." Instruct Aaron, your brother, the Kohen Gadol, and tell him, "Beha'aloisecha haneros." When you raise up the candles, when you light the flames of the menorah, el mul pnei hamenorah ya'iru shivas haneros. Towards the pnei hamenorah, the 7 candles shall burn. Now, Rashi tells us a number of details on this pasuk. So firstly, this comes subsequent to the end of last week's parsha. At the end of last week's parsha, we have the gifts of the Nesiim. The various princes of the tribes each day brought a gift for the inauguration of the Mishkan. And Aaron, as the head of Shevet Levi, felt despondent, felt upset that he did not have the opportunity of bringing a gift for the Mishkan. And Hashem told him that your contribution will be greater than theirs because you and your descendants after you will light the menorah. And that's why this passage follows immediately afterwards. And from this pasuk, we see that there are 7 candles on the menorah, the Shivas HaNeros, and they are El Mul Pnei HaMenorah. Literally, that means facing the Pnei HaMenorah. The Pnei HaMenorah refers to the central branch of the menorah, the actual body of the menorah itself. And the cups of the menorah on the 6 sides were pointed towards the middle so that all of the candles would shine towards the middle branch of the menorah. And then the pasuk continues, Vayas Cain Aaron el mul pnei menorah. Aaron did as Hashem instructed, and he lit the candles facing towards the middle. And then we have a pasuk describing the construction of the menorah. V'zeh maseh menorah. This is the making of the menorah. Miksha zahav. It should be gold that is beaten by a hammer. The menorah had to be made out of a kikar zahav, a talent of gold. It had to be exactly 1 talent if the menorah was made of gold. And it could not be made welded together. It could not be made in pieces that had been welded together. But all of the decorative features on the menorah had to be beaten out of 1 solid piece of gold with a hammer. And that is the word miksha. Miksha means the beating of the metal. And then that would be used to shape the menorah. Ad Yerecha, ad Pircha, from its base, its leg, literally, which refers to the base of the menorah, until its flower. The flower was one of the decorative structures on the menorah. Mikshahi, it should all be beaten, as I've shown you the image of the menorah on the to Moshe, which is talking about the description back in Parshas Teruma. So if we have a look in the Rambam tells us the details of the construction of the menorah. If you look in this picture, for example, you'll notice there are various decorative features, some shaped like triangles in this picture, some shaped like balls, and some shaped like dishes. These features are referred to as kaftorim, balls, geviyim, cups, and parachim, flowers. So the Torah tells us, or the Rambam tells us in the laws of the Beis HaBechira, that the description of the menorah is detailed in the Torah. There were, in the central branch of the menorah, there were 4 gavim, 4 cups, which you could see positioned there, 3 at the top and 1 on the bottom part of the menorah. Ushnei kaftorim, there were 2 ball-shaped shapes of decorations, all made of solid gold. 1 again at the top, and then 1 in the lower part of the menorah. Ushnei perachim, and then 2 flowers. The 2 flower shapes, 1 was at the top, and 1 was towards the bottom of the menorah, and that was all on the central branch, and that is all detailed in Parshas Terumah. But then the Rambam tells us that there was an additional 3rd flower-shaped structure on the menorah, which we learn out from this week's parsha, from Parshas Ba'aloischa, where it says ad yorecha ad pircha, until its base, until its leg, until its flower, from which we learned that there was a decorative flower at the base of the menorah as well. So those were the decorative features on the center of the menorah. Then we have the decorations on each of the 6 branches. So the Torah tells us that there were 3 kaftorim, that there were 3 ball-shaped decorations from which the branches would come out. The 6 kanim, the 6 branches of the menorah, went out in pairs, and each pair came out from a ball-shaped structure. And then on each of the 6 branches, there were 3 gavim, 3 cup-shaped structures. There was 1 kaftor, 1 ball-shaped structure, and 1 perach. So that's where we get the total design of the menorah. And therefore, if we do the maths, there were 22 gavim, 22 cup-shaped features. 7 branches of the menorah, each had 3 at the top, and then 1 towards the bottom. That's shown in yellow. Then there were 11 ball-shaped structures, 7 on the 7 branches at the top, 3 from which the branches emanate from, and then 1 towards the bottom. And then there were 9 flower-shaped structures, 7 on the tops, 1 on each of the branches of the menorah, and then 1 at the base of the menorah, and 1 on the lower part of the menorah. So that's the design, and we're going to be coming back to these features because we know that every detail in the Torah is precise. Every detail has deeper meaning and deeper allusions, especially when we're talking about the Mishkan. The Mishkan represents the resting of the divine presence in the world, and therefore every single detail of the construction of the kelim of the Mishkan have lessons for us. And if the Torah goes into the detail to describe these various features, the cups, the bowls, the flowers, givim, kaftorim, uprachim, it is because they and the number of them are significant as well. Before we launch into the Chassidus, we will quickly look at the psukim of the Haftorah. So the Haftorah comes from the book of Zechariah. Zechariah Hanavi, who was a prophet in the times of Golus Bavel, when the Jewish people were in exile in Bavel, was shown a vision of a menorah. And in that vision, he describes, Vayomer Elai, the angel said to me, Ma ataroya, what do you see? He was shown a vision. The angel asked him, what is it that you see? And I said to him, Ra'isi, I've seen vihine menorahs zahav kula. There is an entirely gold menorah in the vision. V'gula al roisha, there is a basin on top of the menorah. V'shivan neroisea aleha, there are 7 candles, 7 branches on this menorah. Shiva mutzakos laneros ashel arosha. And in a deviation from the menorah, the way it is in the Mishkan, there were 7 pipes. There were 7 additional pipes, for lack of a better word, mutzakos, that would pour oil into the 7 candles of the menorah. Ushnaim zeisim aleha, echad miyamina gula ve'echad asmoila, and to the right and left of this menorah in Yechezkel's vision, there were, Zechariah's vision, there were olive trees, and elsewhere the menorah, the Navi describes how the olives would fall into presses. These would press the oil out of the olives. They would flow into the bowl, and from that bowl, through the 7 tubes, they would feed the candles of the menorah. What is the symbolism of the menorah? So the Malach says to him that Zed Dvar Hashem El Zerubbabel Lemor, that this menorah represents the word of Hashem to the Jewish people. And the pasuk uses the name Zerubbabel. Now, whilst Zerubbabel was an individual as well, he was a leader of the Jewish people in the times of the return to Eretz Yisrael for the Second Commonwealth. But Hasidus explains that Zerubbabel here represents the collective of the Jewish people, and we'll discuss the significance of that name. So that's a bit of background, a bit of introduction. We'll now launch into the Hasidus of the description of the menorah, and we're going to share a number of different insights. Unfortunately, there's not enough time to go through everything. It would be a very, very long shir. There is just so much fascinating literature in the mystical teachings of Hasidus about the design of the menorah, but we will suffice with just a few elements. So the Alter Rebbe in Likutei Torah explains that the menorah is a representation of the collective of the Jewish people. We know that there are 600,000 males, which are referenced in the Torah, and the Alter Rebbe in Tanya tells us that these refer to sparks of the Jewish souls, from which all Jewish souls derive. But those 600,000 males, which represents the Jewish people who left Mitzrayim, who left Egypt, when the Jewish people came with Yaakov into Mitzrayim, they were 70 members of the family. So if we were to go back up to the collective source of the souls of the Jewish people, we have the number 70. And the collective source of the number 70 is 7. So the 7 branches of the menorah represent Klalos Neshamos Yisrael. It represents all of the Jewish souls in the feature of the menorah itself. And we're going to come back to the unity of the Jewish people, but now we'll discuss the 7 branches. The 7 branches of the menorah represent 7 different approaches, 7 different types, 7 different personality traits that we express in our service of Hashem. We're familiar with the idea of the 7 sephiros, the 7 divine energies with which God creates and interacts with the world. There's the attribute of chesed, kindness, and love. There's the attribute of gevura, which means discipline or leads to fear and awe of Hashem. There's tiferes, beauty, netzach, ambition, hoid, which is humility or surrender. Yesod is connection, and malchus represents the idea of receiving. So these 7 midos, each one of us possesses within our soul the full gamut of all 7 of these qualities. But we have a dominant trait. So for example, Beis Hillel or Avram Avinu, their dominant trait was the attribute of chesed, and therefore their primary mode of service of Hashem was one of love. In contrast, Yitzchak, his soul root, like that of Beis Shammai after him, was from the attribute of gevura, and therefore his dominant trait was one of severity, of being strict and being self-disciplined. So the 7 branches of the menorah represent the 7 primary traits with which we serve Hashem, and each one of us will be different. Each one of us will have a different mode in which we serve Hashem, and these are the 7 branches of the menorah. Yet we'll see in a moment that all of those 7 branches, whilst they come out separately from one another, representing that there are 7 unique ways of serving God, nonetheless, they are all from one solid piece of gold, representing how we are all one and united. To take this, not the way Hasidus explains, to apply this a little bit more laterally, we know that the Jewish people is a rainbow. The Jewish people is made up of different groups. We have Ashkenazim and we have Sephardim, we have Hasidim, we have non-Hasidim. We have a full different, and within that itself, there are multiple groups. Each person has their own unique hashkafa. Each group has their own unique ways, minhagim, and paths in service of Hashem. And whilst we might be different in terms of the branches, the way we emanate, the way we express ourselves outwardly, but essentially we all derive from that one menorah. We are all part of that one collective menorah, which represents the Jewish people. So those are the 7 branches. But what is the idea of lighting up the menorah? So Aaron HaKohen, in the teaching of the Zohar, Aaron is referred to as Shushvina de Matronissa. What is the idea of a Shushvin or Shushvinin? These are the unterfeers. When we have a marriage, a wedding between a chassan and kala, the chassan and kala are escorted to the chuppah by unterfeers, by Shushvinin. The chassan, of course, represents HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the kala represents the Jewish people. And the role of Aaron is to be the escort, the entourage, the shushvinin of the Jewish people. Meaning that Aaron's function is to lift us up as the Jewish people, to raise us up closer to Hashem. We know that the candles, the flame, is a metaphor for the neshama. Kiner Hashem nishmas Adam, the flame of Hashem is the soul of man. And the role of Aaron HaKohen as one of the Shiva Royim, as one of the 7 shepherds of the Jewish people, is to lift up our souls, to inspire us, to elevate us to higher levels of connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. to raise up the flame. Now, what does that mean in an essential idea? So the pasuk says, El mul pnei ha-menorah ya'iru shivas haneros, that Aaron has to light up the candle of the menorah towards the pnei ha-menorah. Pnei comes from the word pnimius, the inner essence of the menorah. Because each one of us has the inner essence of our soul, the inner core of our soul, which is a powerful desire and yearning for connection to Hashem. But by and large, we are not in touch with that deep inner desire, and we live with our more conscious faculties of the soul on a day-to-day basis. The deeper inner power of the soul is a powerful yearning for Hashem. It's a powerful connection to Hashem. And Aaron's role is to lift us up to the Pnei HaMenorah, to get in touch with, to be elevated towards the pnimius of our soul, which is the pnimius of our desire, our rotten to connect to Hashem. And that's the function of Aaron as one of the 7 shepherds of the Jewish people. And that is the role of Jewish leaders, of tzaddikim, that they are there to elevate us towards our spiritual source, to the source of our neshama, to the essence of our neshama, and thereby elevate us to a deeper connection to Hashem. So that's the opening pasuk of Ba'aloisches Haneros, when you raise up the candles. Taking this idea a little bit further, that the menorah represents the collective of the Jewish people. So in the description of the menorah had to be made out of solid gold. And the pasuk says that it is ad yerecha ad pircha, from its leg, from its foot, until its flour, miksha, it should be beaten with gold. The Alter Rebbe explains that amongst the Jewish people, we know that we have a full spectrum of spiritual levels. That we have the great tzaddikim and talmidei chachamim, who are masters of Torah, who are masters of prayer, who are spiritually elevated individuals. And then you have the rest of us, the lowly individuals who don't have a deep connection to Hashem through high-level study of Torah and immersion in the words of prayer. This is alluded to in the Navi, who describes the Jewish people as being made up of Zera Adam and Zera Behema, the seed of man and the seed of animals. The difference between man and animal is that man has a profound das, profound understanding, whereas animal lacks das. So there are those neshamas, there are those souls, such as that of the tzaddikim, who possess a deep das, a deep understanding and connection with Hashem. But then there are those of us who are like animals, who have a very limited connection and understanding with Hashem. And those are alluded to by the 2 features of the menorah identified in the pasuk. The pasuk says, ad yerecha, ad pircha, till its base, till its flower. The base means the lowest part of the menorah. Those are the legs of the menorah, and that represents the base, or the lowest denomination within the Jewish people. That represents spiritually lowly individuals. But the flower means to flourish. That refers to the tzaddikim and talmidei chachamim who grow and flourish in their service of Hashem. They flourish in their Torah study, they flourish in their prayer. And yet, even though there's this disparity between these spiritually lofty souls and the spiritually lowly souls, we are all one menorah. We are all part of that one menorah. Not only that, but we are all made of pure gold. The menorah says that it had to be entirely made of gold. If we go back to the Haftorah, in the Haftorah, the pasuk describing the menorah, the vision of Zechariah, says that I saw a menorah's zahav kula, a menorah that was entirely made of gold. And the Medrash says something very interesting. The Medrash connects this idea of being entirely made of gold to a pasuk in Shir Hashirim. And of course, we know that Shir Hashirim is a love song which describes the relationship of Hashem and the Jewish people, using the metaphor of a man and a woman, the love of a man and a woman together. And in this book of Shir Hashirim, Hashem says that Kulach Yafa Rayasi, that my beloved is all, Yafa is all, is entirely beautiful, that Mum Ein Bach, and you have no blemish in you. That Hashem is describing the Jewish people as being entirely beautiful with no blemishes. And the Medrash draws a parallel between this pasuk in the Nevuah of Zechariah about the menorah, which describes the menorah as being menorah zahav kula, made entirely out of gold. And what that means is that when Hashem describes us as being a beautiful people, being a spiritually beautiful people, with no blemishes, with no faults, with no shortcomings, he is not just referring to the flowers of the Jewish people. He's not just referring to the tzaddikim, but is referring to all of the Jewish people, that we are all of pure gold. And the Alter Rebbe contrasts this based on a medrash which brings from other Nevi'im. We have 3 Nevi'im who describe the Jewish people using the metaphor of metal. We have the Navi Zechariah, we have the Navi Yechezkel, and the Navi of Yirmiyahu. So Yechezkel and Yirmiyahu describe the Jewish people as metals that have sediments within them. So when they describe the Jewish people, they describe them as being made out of tin or out of silver that had been rejected, kesef nimas, that is Yirmiyahu. Yechezkel described them as being made of copper or tin, iron, lead, and dirty, sullied silver. So Yechezkel and Yirmiyahu, aside from the fact that they describe the Jewish people with the inferior metals of silver, copper, tin, iron, and lead, but they also describe the Jewish people as having blemishes, just like these metals have impurities within them. But the Navi Zechariah, when he describes the Jewish people, number one, he describes them as a menorah of gold. And number two, he describes them as being of pure gold, kulach yafarayasi, again, drawing a parallel to Shir Hashirim, that it is gold which is unblemished, that the Jewish people possess no blemishes within them. And the Alter Rebbe, followed by the Rebbe in a number of Maimarim, discusses this idea and points out a very interesting thing. Yechezkel and Yirmiyahu were prophets in the times, at least Yechezkel in the beginning of his career as a Navi, was during the time when the Beis HaMikdash was standing and the Jewish people were still in Eretz Yisrael. And yet, even though it was in a more spiritually lofty time, when the Beis HaMikdash was standing, they described the Jewish people using the analogy of inferior quality metals, such as silver, copper, lead, and describe them as seeing blemishes, that they have sediments and impurities within them. And yet Zechariah, who was a prophet in Galus Bavel, when the Jewish people were in exile, presumably in exile they would be in a lower spiritual state, he does not describe their faults. He does not describe their shortcomings. He does not describe them as having sediments and impurities, but rather describes them as a beautiful menorah made entirely of gold. And as the Medrash says, kulach yafa rayasi, that my beloved is entirely beautiful. So Yechezkel and Yirmiyahu, when they looked at the Jewish people, they saw the deficiencies, they saw the impurities, they saw the negativity and the baggage of the Jewish people. They saw their spiritual shortcomings. But Zechariah realized that all of these blemishes, all of these faults and shortcomings are only skin deep, they are only surface level. But deep down, every single Jewish person possesses an untaintable core, a godly soul, a neshama, which is part of God and completely incorruptible, and that is pure gold. So when Zechariah looked at the Jewish people, he did not pay attention to their external limitations, to their external shortcomings. He looked and saw them as that pure essential core of gold that cannot be tainted, which is, of course, a lesson to us in how we look at our fellow Jew. We can look at our fellow Jew and we can see them as being lowly. We can look at them and see them as full of deficiencies, shortcomings, and lackings. Or like Zechariah, we can look at every Jew and see them as part of the menorah of the Jewish people. We can see every Jew as being of pure gold, and we can see every Jew being free of faults when we look at them and judge them and look at them based on their pure essential core, the way they are part of this collective menorah of the Jewish people. So why was it specifically in the times of Galus that Zechariah was able to see the Jewish people on a deeper level and only see the good within them? So there are a number of explanations, but one explanation is, on a very limited level, is that when people are struggling, when people are in Galus, when people are down and out, it is not the time to point out their faults and shortcomings. It's not the time to be critical. On the contrary, at that time, they need us to view them in the best possible light. But on a deeper level, what is it that brings the core of the Jewish soul to the fore? It is specifically when we are distanced from Hashem, when we are in Galus, when we face challenges, when we face struggles, just like the olive, only when it's pressed, it gives out its oil that can be used to illuminate. so too the Jewish people, it is only when we face the challenges and struggles of Golus, that is what brings out the best within us. And I think in recent times, since the Simchas Torah October 7th massacre, we've seen this, is that unfortunately, it's the tribulation, unfortunately, it's the tragedy, unfortunately, it's the suffering that we face that brings out the pure golden soul within each one of us. An increase in achdus, in unity, in brotherly love, in return to Hashem, etc. Chesed, all of that is brought out specifically through the challenges of Golus. And therefore, when the Jewish people were in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, Yechezkel and Yirmiyahu saw them, and they saw all of their shortcomings. But when they were in Golus, when that pressing of the olive brought forth their inner soul, then the Navi Zachari was able to see their deeper self. If we take this idea of unity a little bit deeper, the Torah describes how the menorah had to be made. The menorah had to be made, as we said before, from one solid block of gold. It couldn't be made of parts that were welded together. On the most basic level, that again represents the unity of the Jewish people, that we are all part of one guf, or in the terminology of the mystics, the Shalach HaKadosh and others, we are all like one body. We are all like one soul. Just like a body has different organs, different limbs, each with their own uniqueness, their own unique function, but they are all one body. They all comprise one body. And if one of them were to not be functioning properly or missing, then the entire body would be weakened as a result. And therefore, that is a metaphor for the Jewish people, that each one of us, every single Jew, has an integral part to play within the collective body of the Jewish people. And if they were to be missing, if their influence were not to be there, then we would spiritually be deficient, we would spiritually be unwell. Just as if the menorah was missing even 1 gram from its measurement, it would be invalid as well. And the Alter Rebbe connects this to a famous statement of the sages, Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh B'zeh. All of the Jewish people are guarantors one for the other, are responsible one for the other. But the word arevim, in addition to meaning responsible or a guarantor, also comes from the word to be me'urav, which means to be mixed together, which means that all of the Jewish people on the level of our neshama, we are all mixed together in one homogeneous type of unit. When you make a recipe, when you make a cake, all the different ingredients get blended together to the point that you can no longer tell where one ends and the other begins. They're completely fused together. They are me'uravim, they are mixed together. And so too, Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh B'zeh means that all of the Jewish people are mixed together. And that is the symbolism of miksha, the idea of hammering. The idea of hammering, which also means the striking of the hammer onto the metal, represents bittul hatzura. It represents that you take a block of gold, a lump of gold, and when you hammer it, it causes the form to be lost, that shape to be lost. And that represents bittul. It represents humility. Because the key to achieving this oneness, the key to recognizing how every single Jew is valuable and has something to contribute to the Jewish people, is only if we have humility within ourselves. But taking this idea a little bit deeper, the Alter Rebbe says a fascinating idea. Based on this, we can understand a meditation, something that we should be thinking about in our own minds, that can bring us to this Ahavas Yisrael, to Achdus Gomer, to true unity. And the Alter Rebbe prefaces by saying, Ha'ikar, the main thing is, shetzarech liyos Achdus Gomer zeh im zeh. There has to be absolute unity of Jewish people one with the other, and that means shelo yabit b'ra'as chaveroi, not to look at the bad within one's friend, not to see their shortcomings, not to see their faults, not to see the bad in others. So how do we do that? When we look at people, we naturally judge. We see people who are of lesser observance than us. We see people who seem to act in a way which is lowly, undignified, unbecoming. And we sometimes feel ourselves to be more spiritually superior because we are more engaged with the observance of Torah and mitzvahs. So here says the Alter Rebbe is the symbolism of hammering. Chazal described that when you take gold, which is a soft and malleable metal, and you strike it with a hammer, the force of the hammer pushes the lower gold upwards, and the gold which is higher, you use it to push it down. And that's how you stretch the gold and are able to shape it into the shape of the menorah. So the function of the mixture, of the striking, causes that which is lower to elevate upwards, and the gold which is higher to come down. So the Alter Rebbe explains, based on this idea that we are all mu'uravim, we are all mixed together, we are all interconnected, it means that we subliminally, or on the soul level, impact one another. Just like the different parts of the body all have an impact on one another, so too, we as Jews, we impact one another as well. And therefore, the Alter Rebbe explains that sometimes, that when we look at someone that is behaving in a negative way, when we look at a person who has Aveirus, someone who's on a spiritually lower level than ourselves, the Alter Rebbe says that really, that could be in that lower Jew, so to speak, because it's come down from the higher gold, which means that it's actually something deficient in me, something wrong within me, a fault of mine that has had an effect spiritually on that person that has resulted in them acting in a way which would not be considered appropriate or becoming fitting for a Jew to act. Meaning that I have to take ownership and see that their negativity actually I could be responsible for, either because my spiritual infractions have an effect on that person, or I have a responsibility which I failed to exercise in helping that person to raise their spiritual standing. Conversely, when we look at our own qualities, when we look at our own spiritual achievements and accomplishments, our mitzvahs, we should not take credit for them for ourselves, because perhaps that is the lower gold being elevated upwards. That perhaps the same subliminal effect happens, that other Jewish person, the good within them, has affected me and brought me to act in a positive way as well. And if we look at ourselves and others in that way, then what happens is as follows. Our own qualities, we don't take credit for. Instead, we attribute them to the influence of others. And when we look at others and see their negative qualities, we take ownership and see it as coming from ourselves and our influence. And if a person goes with that perspective, when we look at others, we will only see their qualities. We will only see their goodness, and we will save the criticism and the negativity, so to speak, for ourselves. That instead of seeing bad in others, we'll focus on our own faults and shortcomings. And instead of focusing and highlighting the good within ourselves, we'll focus and highlight on the good within others. And that is the metaphor of the beating of the hammer, where that which is below rises up and that which is above goes down below, which is a fascinating insight. We could spend a lot more time talking about it, but we do have more to talk about. So now let's move on. The first three ideas we've spoken about was very much how the Menorah represents the Jewish people, the 7 branches, the different paths in the service of Hashem, the fact that we are all from one solid block, we are all part of the Menorah, we are all pure gold, even not just the flowers, but also the base, the spiritually elevated and the spiritually lowly. And the fact is that we all influence one another, just like the beating of the gold. But now we're going to move on. And based on the writings of the Tzemach Tzedek, look at another perspective of the Menorah, that the Menorah represents Torah study. The Pasuk says, Kiner mitzvah v'Torah ur. Shlomo HaMelech says that mitzvahs are likened to a candle, and Torah is likened to light. Torah brings illumination. Torah brings light to our world, to our lives, and therefore the Menorah as a source of light represents the teachings of Torah. What's interesting is that if we look at the shape of the Menorah had 7 branches. But in the shape of the Menorah, the 7 branches are really 6 branches emanating out from one central branch. We know that the Torah comprises 2 parts. There is the Torah shebichsav, the written Torah, and then there is the Torah sheba'al peh, the oral Torah. And the oral Torah is divided into 6 orders, the 6 orders of the Mishnah as codified by Rebbe Yehuda Hanassi. But the Mishnah is only an explanation of the mitzvahs that are sourced within the Torah itself. So in a way, the 6 branches of the Menorah representing the 6 orders of the Torah Sheba'al Peh all emanate, they all derive from the central branch, which represents the Torah Shebichsav. Taking the idea of the Menorah, the symbolism a little bit further, let's come back to the the various features, decorative features on the Menorah. The Tzemach Tzedek quotes from a sefer known as the Akedah, which says some fascinating insights. That the 7 branches of the Menorah correspond to the 7 words in the first pasuk of the book of Bereshis. Bereshis bara Elokim, es hashamayim ve'es haaretz. So that's the 7 branches referred to the 7 words in the first pasuk of the book of Bereshis. The 11 ball-shaped structures, the 11 kaftorim on the menorah, represent or correspond to the 11 words in the first pasuk of the book of Shemos, the second book of the Torah. You can check this up a little bit later. The 9 flower-shaped structures on the menorah correspond to the 9 words in the opening pasuk of the book of Vayikra, the third book of the Torah. The menorah, the Rambam tells us, stood 18 tefachim tall, 1.5 amos tall, and that the 18 tefachim correspond to the 18 words in the opening pasuk of the book of Bamidbar, and the 22 gavim, the 22 cups, correspond to the 22 words in the opening pasuk of the book of Devarim. So a fascinating bit of trivia to see how the different features of menorah correspond to the opening pasuk of each of the 5 books of the Chumash. Just also related to this week's parsha. So in this week's parsha, we have the psukim Vayhi bin Soya ha'aret, which in the Torah are bracketed off with small nuns that are upside down and back to front. And based on this, the Gemara tells us that according to one opinion, there are in fact 7 books of the Torah. We talk about 5 books of the Torah, but according to one opinion, there are 7 books of the Torah, because these psukim of Vayhi bin Soya Aaron is a pasuk to itself. So you have the book of Bereshis, book of Shmos, book of Vayikra, the beginning of Bamidbar, the psukim of Vayhi bin Soya Ha'aron, the remainder of the book of Bamidbar, and then the book of Devarim. So the 7 branches of the menorah, in addition to representing the Torah Shebichsav and the 6 orders of the Mishnah, also represents the way the Torah can be divided into 7 books as well. On this theme that the menorah represents the idea of Torah, so the Tzemach Tzedek explains that each of the branches had 3 cups on them, 3 cups. And as the Rebbe points out, the Rambam in his diagram of the menorah, in his hand-drawn manuscript, shows these cups facing downwards, which represents that the menorah is there to pour down revelation from above to below. What is the symbolism of having 3 cups on each of the branches? So the 3 cups correspond to the 3 parts of the Tanakh: Torah, Nevi'im, and Kesuvim. The kaftar, the bowl, which in fact was shaped like an apple, as the Rambam describes. So the apple is covered by a peel. That represents the hidden mystical teachings of Torah, the esoteric teachings of the Torah, which are hidden. They are covered over. And the flower represents pilpul of Torah, because the study of Torah in a way of pilpul grows and flourishes the learning of Torah. So the various features also correspond to different parts of Torah as well. Let's move on. And another dimension of the menorah represents the days of the week. The 7 branches of the menorah represent the 7 days of the week. The center of the menorah, like the center of our lives, is the holy day of Shabbos. The day of Shabbos, whilst it comes at the end of the week, but in some regards, it's actually in the middle, because at least in a halachic sense, when you have a gathering of people, the most important of those guests should be in the middle, with other people flanking them on the sides. So too, Shabbos is seen as being the center. The 3 days prior to Shabbos, which would be Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, are called the days before Shabbos, because these are the days in which we are already preparing for the upcoming Shabbos. The 3 days after Shabbos, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, are called the days after Shabbos, because we still have that lingering inspiration and upliftment, the effects of the Shabbos that we just had. So therefore, we can, in a way, view Shabbos as the middle of the week. There are 3 days before Shabbos, leading up to Shabbos, where we come with heightened anticipation and preparation, both physically and spiritually, for Shabbos. And then we have the 3 days after Shabbos, which actually plays out in halacha, that a person who did not make Havdalah on Motzei Shabbos can make Havdalah during the 3 days after Shabbos as well, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, because that is when we're still living with the high, living with the spiritual upliftment of the previous Shabbos. We mentioned before that all of the branches of the menorah, the cups on the top, were positioned in a way that the wicks and hence the flames face towards the middle, because every day of the week, a Yid is looking towards Shabbos. We say this. when we say in the Shir Shel Yom, every single day when we mention that this is the Shir of Yom Rishon l'Shabbos, right? This is Yom Sheni l'Shabbos. We're constantly counting towards Shabbos. That Shabbos is the focus of our week. In a broader sense, the 6 days of the week represents our involvement in the mundane physicality of the world. Shabbos represents our isolation and oasis within the spiritual world in prayer and Torah study. And really our eyes the entire week should be focused with longing when we will come to Shabbos, when we'll be able to engage in that spiritual upliftment. Let's finish off with one or two more ideas, which I'll run through quickly. And that is the idea of the 7 branches of the Menorah. We mentioned at the beginning of this year that whilst the 7 branches represent different types of Jews, but they also represent the 7 midos, the 7 emotional character traits, the emotional drives that we have within us. Atop each of these 7 branches, we said, were 3 cups, and the cups were facing downwards. The significance of the 3 cups represent the 3 intellectual qualities of Chachma, Bina, and Das. One of the fundamentals in Chassidus is that the human being has the power to control their heart with their mind. Unlike an animal which is instinctive and led by its heart, the human being, and especially a Jewish person, is expected that our emotions are directed, shaped, and driven by our mind, by our intellect. That we use our minds to meditate on the greatness of Hashem, and that should flow through to our hearts to have a love of Hashem. That we use our understandings of what is right and wrong to control the negative emotions within our hearts. So the symbolism of the menorah is that the 7 branches representing the 7 midos, the 7 emotional drives of a person, have to receive from the 3 cups of Chachma, Bina, and Das. That they have to be created and directed, that we draw down the influence of our mind, of our intellect, into our heart, into our emotions as well. We'll conclude with one final idea, and we'll come back to the Haftorah, which was the Nevuah of Zechariah. So to give a little bit of background, in the Nevuah of Zechariah, what Zechariah effectively sees is a self-oiling menorah. In order to light the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash, they needed to harvest olives. They needed to take those olives to an olive press. They needed to press that oil, collect it in a vat. Then they needed to pour that oil into the menorah in order for it to light. There had to be a lot of human activity in preparing the oil to light the menorah. But in the vision of Zechariah, of the golden menorah, which represents the vision of the times of redemption, the times of the Geula, he saw an automated process, a fully automated process from beginning to end. That on the sides of the menorah were 2 olive trees, one on the right and one on the left. The olives would grow and would develop and would fall off into an olive press where they were automatically pressed to release the oil. The oil would collect in the bowl, and through the 7 pipes, the 7 tubes from this bowl, the oil would flow to constantly maintain the supply of oil in the 7 branches, the 7 candles of the menorah. So what does this represent? Chassidus describes that there are 2 paradigms. One paradigm is Isarusa de la Satsa, Isarusa de la Ela. That our actions, our effort, our work that we put in causes a reciprocal revelation from above. But the most critical part is the effort that we put in. That is the menorah of the Beis HaMikdash, where everything had to come through human effort. The crushing of the olives, the collecting of the oil, the pouring of the oil into the menorah, everything had to be done by man's hand. But then there are godly revelations which are so lofty that we are not able to access them ourselves. Nothing that we as limited, finite human beings could do to reach that level of godly revelation. And that comes as a pure gift from above, known as an Isarusa de la Ela, a pure awakening from above that is not dependent on our actions below. In the times of Moshiach, the godly revelation will be so powerful, will be so brilliant, that it is beyond anything that we could do to generate. And therefore the menorah, which represents the light and revelation of that time, is purely from above, that everything happens automatically and is not conditioned on our effort, is not conditioned on our work, because it is so lofty. The Ezras Hashem, in the merit of our study of the Menorah, and more importantly, of internalizing the lessons of the Menorah, lessons of unity of the Jewish people, how we should see the positive in others and only see our own shortcomings, not, God forbid, to see the negativity within another person, to realize that we are all part of one solid golden menorah and that every Jew is pure gold. Every Jew is part of that collective menorah of the Jewish people. Even the lowly foot of the menorah is part of that wholesome oneness. When we internalize the lessons of the study of Torah as the source of life and light and radiance in our lives, and when we certainly observe Shabbos and look towards Shabbos every single day of the week, so in the merit of applying all of those messages from the menorah, may we merit the realization of the Nevuah of Zechariah, of that menorah, the messianic menorah, and that will be the menorah in the third Beis Hamikdash, which should come to us with Moshiach's arrival, b'mheira b'yameinu, amen. Okay, thank you for joining us at our shir tonight. If anyone has any questions or any insights that they would like to add, please feel free. Otherwise, look forward to learning with you again next week, same time, Monday night at 8:30.